The National Institute on Drugs and Addiction found that 40.3 million Americans reported substance use disorder in the year 2020. Out of that 40.3 million people, only about 6.5% sought help. That's a staggering statistic. Let me tell you something that's even more staggering than that statistic. 6 times in prison, 2 correctional community-based facilities, 4 halfway houses, about a dozen different jails, and more arrests than I can even remember is my experience with substance abuse. For me, the only thing that changed, the only thing that made me want to change was the trucking. Trucking changed my life. And that... Welcome to From Prisons to Praise. My name is Jamie Rose, and I am your host. And this is the epic saga of a super trucker. You will not be disappointed in this testimony of yours truly. So go ahead and smash that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my content. And make sure you share this to support the channel. Thank you very much. Is a profound statement because the love for my kids, relationships, marriages, the pain that I inflicted upon myself, physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain. None of that was enough. The damage I did to my family, the damage I did to society, my community, none of that was enough. God, all the honor, praise, and glory be to God. Yeah, trucking changed my life. My relationship with God put me in a position to allow trucking to change my life. Had I not actively sought God in moments of despair, I would have never made it to trucking. For as long as I can remember, I believed in God. Now, most of my life, I ran from God. The pain that addiction caused in my life was so great. Out of desperation, I've sought help time and time again. I fall down, but I get back up every single time. Did you know there were over 107,000 reported overdose deaths in the United States in 2021? That could have been me. Because let me tell you something. In order to beat addiction and kick Satan's butt, I gotta be honest. After 6.5 years of being clean and sober and operating a 6-figure company that I own, I relapsed. I ran that company into the ground. I almost lost everything. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. My earliest childhood memory was my mother and father fighting. I was a toddler, strapped in a car seat, and I remember quite vividly looking up and watching those two go at it, physically, verbally. And that was the beginning of a very turbulent childhood. So my mother would remarry 5 different times, 5 different guys. Every time she remarried, that was another stepfather. It was another moving experience. It was another school district. I got to the point where I would go into school, and the first person that tried to talk to me, I would try to pick a fight with, because it was easier to present myself as a thug and a punk than to answer the question of why I was a new kid at this school. I got tired of answering that question. Also, for as long as I can remember, there was a void in my life. That void was me running from God. It took a long time to figure that out, but it was more than that. You see, I was the youngest of 3, with an older brother and an older sister. My brother was 4 years older than me. My sister was just 2 years older than me. My sister was my best friend for a very long time. Even when we were grown and went our separate ways. And sister, like so many people in my life, fell victim to addiction in 2016 after receiving a 5-year prison sentence for my role as the principal in an organized theft/narcotics ring while I was in the reception center facing some of the toughest battles of my life. I leaned into God, and I received news that my wife of 8 years had passed away and succumbed to addiction. And then after being transferred out of my original parent institution into Richland Correctional Institution, I found out that my sister, who was just 2 years older than me and was my best friend growing up, had succumbed to addiction, fentanyl. And that was just one of many. So a lot of my friends passed away, and while I was in Richland, I was fortunate enough that I got my CDL. As soon as I went to CRC, I found out about this program they had, and it was called the CDL program. And there's a company, which I'll come back around to that partners with the state of Ohio, and they help pay for some of the cost of training guys like me in prison to get their CDL. And I grew up, trucking was in my family. You know, it was in my blood. My uncles were truckers growing up. I had cousins that owned their own trucking company. And I always wanted to be a trucker. And then addiction took me down a different road. You know, I'm not going to bore you with stories of my childhood, but it was turbulent, to say the least, as I previously articulated. You know, I experienced sexual abuse from the hands of somebody that nobody should ever have to experience that from. And it changed me. I carried that pain, and hurt people hurt people. He had been sexually abused when he was younger. And then I was sexually abused. And I'm breaking that generational curse. I love my children. I don't ever want them to have to go through that pain. I carried that guilt and shame, and it kept me sick for decades. And hindsight's 2020. That wasn't my fault. That was not fair. Life's not fair, but that, you know, I was mad at God. I was mad at my abuser, and I kept that in. And I share that now because I know that somebody watching this is holding that secret and needs to hear this. It's not your fault. And you don't have to bear that cross. Take it to God. I forgave my abuser because if I expect God to forgive me, then I got to be willing to forgive too. And if you don't, it'll keep you sick. Holding on to that is like drinking poison and expecting somebody else to die. It's not going to work. So as I'm sitting in CRC and they come get me, and I go back to the case manager's office, and he says, I need you to sign this paperwork so your mother-in-law can take care of the proceedings for your wife. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you're the next of kin, but she needs to be able to handle the funeral. I said, what funeral? I just talked to Emmy. And last time I talked to her, she said that she was on her way up here to a rehab. Well, she didn't make it. She died in the back of a semi in Pittsburgh. Very unfortunate. 8 years we had been married. We were separated previously because drugs tore us apart. That's what drugs did to me. It ruined relationships. It took me away from my daughter. It ultimately has taken so many people in my life. I met a guy while I was incarcerated, after I found out that my sister had passed away. I had to make that call to my mom. And I said, is this true? And she immediately broke down. She said, I miss her so much, JRo. And I got to watch a little bit of the funeral on live stream, but I didn't get to grieve that. And I held that in. And I'll tell you what it does to you. We're going to circle back around to that. But I met a guy, a good Christian brother, and he was going through the CDL program. And while I was in there, I was strengthening my bond with God. And this is a good Christian brother, and we shared some time in church together. And one day I looked over and he was crying, and I could tell he was going through something. So I walked up to him and I put my hand on his back and I said, what's going on, brother? He had lost his mom. And I said, well, I want to pray with you. And I prayed with him and I cried with him because I know what it was like to lose a loved one. And we became really good friends. He was like a brother to me in so many ways. And he got released. He got an early release because of the stuff that he'd accomplished in prison. And I followed his lead. I filed for judicial release, and I sitting in prison. I have almost 4 years in total for a 7-count indictment for my role in a engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity, theft ring / narcotic ring. And I pled guilty to felony 2, engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. 6 other counts were dismissed. 3 counts of money laundering, 2 counts of theft. And I had filed a motion for judicial release. And in response, the prosecutor filed a Contra motion, which is basically a motion saying they are opposing my motion. So I filed my motion pro se, meaning I typed it, I filed it on my behalf. It says the assistant prosecuting attorney for Delaware County, Ohio, is opposing the defendant's motion for judicial release. The defendant pled guilty. Moreover, the defendant agreed to serve a 5 5-year prison term. The trial court has imposed a jointly recommended 5-year prison term. Because 5-year prison sentence, the state does not believe he is yet eligible for judicial release. His 5-year prison term expires 3/7/2020. He must serve 4 years of his sentence prior to becoming eligible. However, even if he were eligible, judicial release would not appear to be appropriate in this case. For these reasons set forth above, the state respectfully requests the court to deny the defendant's motion at this time. Judge, I didn't think I was going to get it. Technically, I wasn't even eligible. Even the prosecutor stood up and he said, I wish everybody would do what Mr. Rose did. Go 4 years without a single conduct report and complete all these classes, reentry, CDL, associate's degree, halfway through my bachelor's degree in communication. And he said, but by letter of law, I can't approve it. I gotta oppose it. And the judge said, you're right. He's right. You're not eligible according to the letter of law. He said, well, what makes me think that you've changed? You've been to prison 5 other times with 4 convictions. What's different? And I looked at him with tears rolling down my face because I thought he'd already made his mind up because that's what I was used to. And as I looked back in the gallery and I seen my mom crying and shaking her head as she was holding my pastor's hand, who was sitting next to my sponsor. And I knew they were praying for me. And in that moment, God said, have faith in me. And I know that if God wanted me out of prison, there wasn't a judge or a prosecutor or a warden that was going to keep me in there. I'd already been talking to these people. I had to get approved by a case manager, a unit manager, a deputy warden. Then I had to get approved by William Ellerby, who was a man of great stature. He's a good man. He's in charge of all the programs in the Ohio State Penitentiary, ODRC. Let me correct myself. Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, because Ohio is only one of 3 states that has rehabilitation in the title. That's a big deal because for me, that's what happened. Chuck and changed my life. Had that program not been there, that rehabilitation, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. My life would have went a completely different way. So I'm grateful for that. And, on top of having to file motions to have fines run concurrent with my prison time so that they would lift blocks on my license, and then having a reinstatement fee paid and paying for SR-22 bonds so that I could be eligible to get a license, and then having to wait out the suspension because of my conviction I had gotten on the street for a drug instrument. Yeah, I was a junkie. As soon as I got high, that's what I did. I would put anything and everything in me. And because of that, I went to prison in 2016. I found out I had hepatitis C. But I did that. I followed through with that. And I kept taking the next right step. And I got that CDL. And as I'm sitting there talking to the judge, I said, well, I'll tell you what's different, Your Honor. It's never been this serious. This is life or death for me. And he agreed with me. He said, I agree with you. And he said, you know what? I haven't been doing this long, but I haven't seen anybody come into my courtroom that served 4 years that didn't at least have one conduct report. One contraband, one out of place, one disrespect to staff. None of that? You don't have none of that? No, Your Honor. He said, well, that's commendable. And if I can't give you judicial release, then I can't give it to anybody. And he granted my motion. If you're enjoying this video, the epic saga of a super trucker, and I sincerely hope you are, please smash that subscribe button and share this with all your friends. We have an epic conclusion coming up in part 2. So you don't want to miss this. And thank you for watching and stick around.